Unidentified. My Top UFO Cases by Hector V. Bello, March 2018. The 1957 RB-47 UFO Encounter over the USA. Background for this case: an Air Force RB-47 equipped with electronic countermeasures (EMC) gear and manned by 6 crew members or 6 officers was followed by an unidentified object for a amazing distance of well over 700 miles and for a time period of an hour and a half as it flew from Mississippi through Louisiana and Texas into Oklahoma. The object was at various times seen visually by the cockpit crew as an intensely luminous light followed by ground radar and detected on EMC monitoring gear aboard the RB-47 aircraft. Of special interest in this case are the several instances of simultaneous appearances and disappearances of all 3 of those physically distinct channels, and rapidly of maneuvers beyond the prior experience of the aircrew. Introduction. In the early morning hours of July 17, 1957, an RB-57 was flying out of Forbes Air Force Base in Topeka, Kansas, on a composite mission that included gunnery exercises over the Texas Gulf area, navigation exercises over the open Gulf, and finally EMC exercises scheduled for the return trip across the south central United States. The RB-57 was carrying a 6-man crew, of whom 3 were electronic warfare officers manning EMC gear in the aft portion of the aircraft. Their names are as follows: Louis D. Chase, pilot James H. McCoy, co-pilot Thomas H. Henley, and navigator John J. Provenzano, number 1 monitor Frank B. McClure, number 2 monitor Walter A. Tushera, number 3 monitor. I shall draw upon my interview with the crew as well as the case files, which I finally located. The files consist of a 3-page TWX file from the 745th Akron, Duncanville, Texas at 155-7Z on July 17, 1957, and a 4-page case summary prepared by E.T. Pewetz, Wing Intelligence Officer, 55th Reconnaissance Wing, Forbes Air Force Base, and transmitted to ADC headquarters in Entz Air Force Base in Colorado, in compliance with a request of August 15 from Colonel F.T. Jeep, Director of Intelligence, ADC. That summary, plus a 12-page Airborne Observers data sheet, was forwarded on November 17th from ADC to Blue Book, and was evidently the first notification Project Blue Book received concerning this case. The 12-page data sheet, AISOP number 2, was prepared by Major Chase on September 10th and contains a number of points of relevance not covered in other parts of the case file. There is very relevant information in the case file as to the precise times, locations, and other circumstances, and the case file does not have the great virtue of representing a summary account prepared while all of the details were fresh in the minds of the crew. Before describing the first EMC contact, it is necessary to explain briefly the nature of the EMC gear involved in this case. Details are no longer classified, although all of the basic case file documents were initially secret. This RB-47 had 3 passive detection finding DF radar monitors for use in securing coordinate information and pulse characteristics on enemy ground-based radar. The number 2 monitor, manned by McClure, was a ALF or ALA-6DF receiver with back-to-back antennas in a housing on the belly of the RB-47 near the tail spun at 150 to 300 RPM as it scanned an azimuth. Note that this implies the ability to scan at 10 seconds or 10 per second past a fixed ground radar in the distance. Its frequency range was 1000 to 7500 MHz. Inside the antenna, signals from the ALA-6 were processed in a APR-9 radar receiver and an ALA-5 pulse analyzer. All subsequent references to the number 2 monitor imply that system. The number 1 monitor. The number 1 monitor, manned by Provenzano, was an APD-4DF system with a pair of antennas permanently mounted on either wingtip. It was working at a higher frequency. The number 3 monitor, with a frequency range from 30 to 1000 MHz, was manned by Tuxshara. It was not affected and will not be described here. That is monitor number 1. VHF communication were likewise not affected. For emphasis, it needs to be stressed that the DF receivers are not radars and do not emit a signal for reflection off of a distant target. They only listen passively to incoming radar signals and analyze signatures and other characteristics. When receiving a distant radar set signal, the scope displays a pip or strobe at an azimuth or azimuthal position corresponding to the relative bearing in the aircraft coordinate system. For the case of a fixed ground radar approached from one side, the strobe is initially seen in the upper part of the scope and moves down scope, a point to be carefully noted in interpreting the following discussion. Having completed the navigational exercises over the Gulf, Chase headed across the Mississippi coastline, flying at an altitude of 34,500 feet at about Mach 0.75. The weather was perfect and practically cloudless under the influence of a large high-pressure area extending throughout the troposphere. There were no showers or thunderstorms anywhere along the flight route. Shortly after the coast near Gulfport was crossed, at a point marked A on the map on page 00, McClure detected on the number 2 monitor a signal painting at their 5 o'clock position, aft of the starboard beam. It looked to him as if he were receiving a legitimate ground radar signal. Upon noting that the strobe was moving up scope, McClure tentatively decided that it must be a ground radar off to their northwest, painting with 180 degrees ambiguity for some electronic reason. But when the strobe, after sweeping up scope to the starboard side, crossed the flight path of the RB-47 and proceeded to move down scope on the port side, McClure said he gave up the hypothesis of the 180-degree ambiguity as incapable of explaining such behavior. Fortunately, he had examined the signal characteristics on his ALA-5 pulse analyzer before the signal left his scope on the port side aft. In discussing it with me, his recollection was that the frequency was near 2800 MCS, and he recalled that what was particularly odd was that it had a pulse width and pulse repetition frequency, or PRF, much like that of a typical S-band ground-based search radar. He even recalled that there was a simulated scan rate that was normal, perhaps because the strong similarities to ground-based sets such as the CPS-6B widely used at that time. McClure did not at that juncture call his signal to the attention of anyone else in the aircraft. The number 1 monitor was not working the frequency in question. It later developed the number 3 monitor was incapable of working the frequency in question. McClure and the others indicated to me. The next quote, information transcribed from the summary report prepared by the wing intelligence officer, comes Stracher Con WG 55 Forbes Air Force Base in concerning this part of the incident that involved this aircraft, call sign Lacey 17. ENC or ECM, reconnaissance operator number 2 of Lacey 17 RB-47H aircraft intercepted at approximately Meridian, Mississippi, a signal with the following characteristics: frequency 2995 MC to 3000 MC, pulse width of 2.0 microseconds, pulse repetition frequency of 600 CPS, sweep rates of 4 RPM, vertical polarity. Signal moved rapidly up the DF scope, indicating a rapidly moving signal source, for example, an airborne source. Signal was abandoned after observation. Initial visual contact. If nothing further had occurred on that flight to suggest that some unusual object in the vicinity of the RB-47, McClure's observations undoubtedly would have gone unmentioned and would have been quickly forgotten, and even by him. He was puzzled, but at that point still inclined to think that it was some electronic difficulty. The flight plan called for a turn to the west in the vicinity of the Meridian and Jackson, Mississippi, point B. With subsequent planned exercises, herein the EWOs did simulated ECM runs against known ground radar units. The contemporary records confirm what Chase and McCoy described to me far more vividly and in more details concerning the unusual events that soon ensued. They turned into a true heading of 265 degrees, still at Mach 0.75, at 34,500 feet, at 1010 Z, that's 0410 CST. Major Chase, in the forward seat, spotted what he first thought were landing lights of another jet coming in fast from near his 11 o'clock position, at or perhaps a bit above the RB-47's altitude. He called McCoy's attention to it, noted absence of any navigational lights, and as the single intense bluish white light continued to close rapidly, he used the intercom to alert the rest of the crew to be ready for sudden evasive maneuvers. But before he could attempt evasion, he and McCoy saw a brilliant light almost instantaneously change direction and flash across their flight path from port to starboard at an angular velocity that Chase told me he had never seen matched in all of his 20 years of flying, before or after that incident. The luminous source had moved with great rapidity from their 11 o'clock to about their 2 o'clock position and then blinked out. The airborne observer's data sheet, filled out by Chase as part of the post-interrogation, gives the RB-47 position at the time of that 1010Z first visual contact as 32-00N 91-28 west. That is 32-00 north, 91-28 west, which puts it near Winsboro in east central Louisiana, point C. The descriptions obtained in the 1969 interviews with these officers are closely supported by the original intelligence report. Quote, at 10:10 Z, aircraft commander first observed a very intense white light with light blue tint at 11 o'clock from his aircraft, crossing in front to about 2:30 o'clock position. Co-pilot also observed passage of light to 2:30 o'clock, where it apparently disappeared. Chase did not observe any magnetic compass anomalies during the flight. Actions over Louisiana, Texas area. Immediately after the luminous source blinked out, Chase and McCoy began talking about it in the interphone, with the already alerted crew listening in. McClure, recalling the unusual signal he had received in his ALA back near Gulfport, now mentioned for the first time that peculiar incident and concurrently set his number 2 monitor to scan at about 3000 MCS to see what might show up. He found he was getting a strong 3000 MCS signal from about their 2 o'clock position, just the relative bearing at which the unknown luminous source had blinked out moments earlier. Provenzano told me that immediately after that they checked out the number 2 monitor on their known ground radar stations to be sure that it was not malfunctioning. It appeared to be in perfect working order. He then tuned his own number 1 monitor to 3000 MCS and also got a signal from the same bearing. There remained, of course, the possibility that just by chance this signal was from a radar down on the ground and off in that relative direction. But as the minutes went by and the RB-47 continued westward at about 5,000 miles per hour, or 500 at about 500 miles per hour, relative bearing of the 3000 MCS source out in the dark did not move down scope on the monitors as should have occurred with any ground radar, but instead it kept up with the RB-47 holding a fixed relative bearing. I found these and ensuing portions of the entire episode still vivid in the minds of all the men, although their recollections for various details varied somewhat depending on the particular activities in which they were then engaged. Chase varied speed, going to maximum allowed power, but nothing seemed to change the relative bearing of the 3000 MCS source. They crossed Louisiana and headed into eastern Texas, with the object still maintaining station with them. Eventually, they got into the radar coverage area of the 745th Akron, Duncanville, Texas, and Chase dropped his earlier reluctance about calling attention to these peculiar matters and contacted that station, codenamed Utah. The crew was becoming uneasy about the incident by this time. Several of them remarked to me that phase of the incident is tersely described in the following quotes from the report of the wing intelligence officer. The aircraft commander notified crew and ECM operator, and R2 searched for signal described above, found the same approximately 1030 Z at a relative bearing of 070 degrees, the 1035 Z relative bearing of 068 degrees, and 1038 Z relative bearing 040 degrees. Note that the above time would indicate that McClure did not immediately think of making his ALA 6 check, but rather that some 20 minutes went by before that was thought of. Note also that by 1038Z, the unknown source of the 3000 MCS radar-like signal was moving up scope relative to the 500 mile an hour RB-47. The wing intelligence officer continued. At 10:39, Z aircraft commander sighted huge light, which he estimated to be 5,000 below aircraft at about 2 o'clock. Aircraft altitude was 34,500 feet, weather perfectly clear. Although aircraft commander could not determine shape or size of object, he had a definite impression light emanated from top of object at about 1040 Z ECM. Operator number 2 reported he then had two signals at relative bearings of 040 and 070 degrees. Aircraft commander and co-pilot saw these two objects at the same time with the same red color. Aircraft commander received permission to ignore flight plan and pursue object. He notified ADC Site Utah and requested all assistance possible. At 1042Z, ECM number 2 had one object at 020 degrees relative bearing. In my interviews with the aircrew, I found differences between the recollections of the various men. As to some of these points, McCoy recalled that the luminous source occasionally moved abruptly from starboard to port side and back again. Chase recalled that they had contacted Utah. His recollection was that it was Carswell, CGI. However, prior to some of the above events, that Utah was ground painting the target during the time it moved up scope and reappeared visually. As will be seen below, the contemporary account makes it fairly clear that Utah was not painting the unknown until a bit later, after it had turned northward and passed between Dallas and Fort Worth. Chase explained to me that he got FAA clearance, follow it in that off-course turn, point D, and indicated that FAA got all jets out of the way to permit him to maintain pursuit. The intelligence summary continues. At 1042Z, ECM number 2 had one object at 020 degree relative bearing. Aircraft commander increased speed to Mach 0.83, turned to pursue, and object pulled ahead. At 1042 5Z, ECM number 2 again had two signals at relative bearings of 040 and 070 degrees. At 1044Z, he had a simple signal at 050 degree relative bearing. At 1048, EMC3 was recording interphone and command position conversations. ADC Site requested aircraft to go IFF mode 3 for positive identification and then requested position of object. Crew reported position of object as 10 North Mill northwest of Fort Worth, Texas, and ADC Site Utah immediately confirmed the presence of object on their scopes. At approximately 10:50 Z, object appeared to stop and aircraft overshot. Utah reported they lost object from scopes at this time, and EMC number 2 also lost signal. Chase, in replies to my questions, indicated that it was his recollection that there was simultaneously between the moment when he began to sense that he was getting closer at approximately the RB-47 speed and the moment when Utah indicated that their target had stopped on their scopes. He said he veered a bit to avoid colliding with the object, not then being sure that what its altitude was relative to the RB-47, and then found that he was coming over the top of it as he proceeded to close. At the instant that it blinked out visually and disappeared simultaneously from the number two monitor and from the radar scopes at Site Utah, it was at a depression angle relative to his position of something like 45 degrees. Chase put the RB-47 into a port turn in the vicinity of Mineral Wells, Texas, Point E, and he and McCoy looked over their shoulders to try to spot the luminous source again. All of the men recalled the near simultaneity with which the object blinked on again visually, appeared on the number 2 scope, and was again skin painted by ground radar at Site Utah. The 1957 report describes these events as follows. The aircraft began turning. EMC number 2 picked up a signal at 160 degrees relative bearing. Utah regained scope contact, and aircraft commander regained visual contact. At 10:52Z, EMC number 2 had signal at 200 degrees relative bearing. Moving up his DF scope, aircraft began closing on object until the estimated range was 5 nautical miles. At this time, object appeared to drop approximately 15,000 feet altitude, and aircraft commander lost visual contact. Utah also lost object from scopes. At 10:55Z in the area of Mineral Wells, Texas, crew notified Utah they must depart for home station because of fuel supply. Crew queried Utah whether a service report had been submitted, and Utah replied the report had been transmitted. At 10:57Z, ECM number 2 had signal at 300 degrees relative bearing, but Utah had no scope contact. At 10:58Z, aircraft commander regained visual contact of object approximately 20 nautical miles northwest of Fort Worth, Texas. Estimated altitude of 20,000 feet at 2 o'clock from aircraft. Chase added further details on his portion of the events, stating that he requested and secured permission from Utah to dive on the object when it was at lower altitude. He did not recall the sudden descent that is specified in the contemporary account, and there are a number of other minor points in the intelligence report that were not recollected by any of the crew. He told me that when he dove from 35,000 feet to approximately 20,000 feet, the object blinked out, disappeared from the Utah ground radar scopes, and disappeared from the number 2 monitor, all at the same time. McClure recalled that instantaneous disappearance too. It should be mentioned that the occasional appearance of a second visual and radar emitting source was not recalled by any of the officers when I interviewed them in 1969. Actions over Texas-Oklahoma area. McCoy recalled that at about this stage of the activities, he was becoming a bit worried about the excess fuel consumption resulting from the use of maximum allowed power, plus a marked departure from the initial flight plan. He advised Chase that fuel limitations would necessitate a return to the home base at Forbes Air Force Base, so they soon headed north from the Fort Worth area, Point F. McClure and Chase recalled that the ALA-6 system again picked up a 3000 MCS signal on their tail. Once they were northbound from Fort Worth, there was some variance in their recollections as to whether the ground radar concurrently painted the object. McCoy was unable to fill in any of those details. Fortunately, the 1957 intelligence report summarized further events on this part of the flight as they moved northward to Oklahoma. At 11:20, Z aircraft took up heading for home station. This placed area of object off the tail of aircraft. ECM number 2 continued to get DF signal of object between 180 and 190 degrees relative bearing until 11:40 Z, when aircraft was approximately abeam Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. At this time, signal faded rather abruptly. 54 SRWDOI 55th Strategic Reconnaissance Wing, Director of Intelligence, has no doubt the electronic DFs coincided exactly with visual observations by aircraft commander numerous times, thus indicating positively the object being the signal source. It was Chase's recollection that the object was with them only into southern Oklahoma. Hanley recalled that it was with them all the way to Oklahoma City area, Point G. The others remembered only that it was there for some indefinite distance on the northbound leg between Fort Worth and Topeka, their home base. Blue Book. The records indicate that Project Blue Book received summary information of this incident from ADC on October 25th, 1957. Over 2 months after the occurrence of the events, a brief summary ends with the following paragraph. In joint review with the CAA of the data from the incident, it was definitely established by the CAA that object observed in the vicinity of Dallas and Fort Worth, Texas, was an airliner. This refers to a near collision of the two DC-6 American Airlines near Salt Flats, Texas, 50 nautical miles from El Paso at 14,000 feet at 3:30 a.m. of this day. See the map on page 68. The case is now carried in the official Blue Book files as identified as American Airlines Flight 655.